This room we're standing in has a very special history. We're in a city where every square centimeter has a deep history, but this particular one is really close to my heart because Durar Hall is where Daria Shafir and the women of the feminist movement of her time gathered, about 1,500 women. And they organized in this space and stepped outside the doors here and walked down to the Parliament building to demand women's rights to vote and to demand representation at Parliament. And this was an incredibly historical moment, and we're an Egyptian woman like me owe her such a huge debt of gratitude. And her story is often not quite completely told. And so I just wanted to start off by saying thank you to Duria, and I think her daughter Aziz actually is a professor here, right? And I wanted to also point out that just outside the hall is a small plaque that commemorates her work. And when that happened a couple years ago when I was here, Aziz and I were talking, and we think it might be the only public recognition of Doria's fight for the visibility and the empowerment of women. And I'm just super humbled and grateful that I get to stand in this room again and acknowledge her work. So I'd like to start with that.
So we thought we'd just quickly, I just want to say from my side to thank you for being here. Thank you to Art Tajit and their fabulous team for putting this great exhibition together and this program. So Sherin and I thought we had worked together before, and we thought we'd kind of start with a little brief introduction to Bardo LA, which is an organization that has produced Sherin's piece at Forever Is Now. It's an organization I started in 2000, I was going to do the math, but 2014. And I went big with the first exhibition, because why not?
Hello?
And we opened with a show of 20 Los Angeles artists at the Venice Biennale. I think probably most of you do know, but for those who don't know, the Biennale di Venezia is a biennial exhibition that started in 1795, so they've been going at it for quite some time. And we presented 20 Los Angeles artists. Sherin was, yes, I kind of have to turn this. We did it in collaboration with Accademia di Belle Arti in Venice. And I came at it as a curator that was inspired by the original meaning of that word, which is, it has a Latin root and it means to take care of. And so my approach to curating is mostly inspired by that concept of taking care of something or someone. So artist and art. And this particular exhibition, because I'm a writer, was inspired by a poem by an American poet, Jack Gilbert, in which there is a line called, "We must risk delight." And so this is Sherin's piece that was in the show with, as I said, 20 other LA artists. And then we branched out and started doing projects in public spaces with the idea that, the other thing that kind of seems needed in the world is to put art in places that are more accessible to a larger audience. And this is an exhibition that was also a collaboration between an artist and a young woman poets from Los Angeles who are mentored by an organization called Bright Pearl, and mostly come from underrepresented communities in Los Angeles, where resources for art of any kind are severely lacking. And so we had the girls, they were all young women, girls really actually, from ages 12 to 20, write short haiku poems in response to the images of Renee Fox, who is a Los Angeles muralist, and who did these amazing, I wish the images were better, but maybe they are when you're further away. Anyway, these are all native LA birds, and so all the girls wrote their responses, and it just was incredible to witness their talent at such a young age, and really wonderful to participate in giving them a voice on such a large scale, because this piece was in one of the busiest terminals at LAX, so seen by a lot of people, something that they were not used to. And one of the reasons why I chose this project as sort of an example of what we do is this emphasis on collaboration. My other interest as a curator is site specificity, meaning how does art fit within the space that we're showing it, and often galleries and museums and institutional places for art tend to be very controlled environments. And what I'm interested in as a curator is more how art behaves out in the world, which is what our talk will kind of center on, because that's, once Sherin and I finished with the Venice Biennale, I started as an executive director of Desert X, which was, it still is, a biennial exhibition that I created from scratch with the artistic director Neville Wakefield, who was supposed to join us tonight, but is flying at the moment. And it was, we selected 16 artists to do projects across the desert, and Sherin was somebody that I really wanted to see take part in the exhibition, because yet another part of Brighton LA is that as an immigrant woman myself, I come from former Yugoslavia. I live in the States now for way too many years. I really wanted to uplift women artists, to contribute to having their work seen in any way that I could, because I think it's obvious to everyone. I think it's just that most people aren't doing much about it, but there's just not enough support for women artists to do work, particularly on a large scale. And so this is how this started, and this piece is called The One I Call, and it was done in 2017. So I'll let Sherin tell you a little more about it.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch on some of the points that Elizabeta made, you know, for me at the time, I'd been, you know, working in the studio for like a solid kind of immersion to my career period. So, I had this photograph of a Burg Hammam, you know, in my studio at Pigeon Town, and it was just sitting there in my studio for years. And I do make quite large scale work, sculptures, within sculptures, or some paper, etc., etc. But of course, you know, one of the things that always comes up at these exhibitions is why are not more women artists represented? And it's a complicated answer, certainly. But for me, there was absolutely no support structure, no organization that would be able to support my producing a work like that. You know, I teach, I have a family, I have other responsibilities, so I could only do what I could produce in my own studio, and this was kind of a dream, you know, how do I make this work in public spaces, because we've, within our discourse as artists and curators within our community, we know the importance, I felt like I know the importance of having work break that barrier of the kind of elite white cube space of the gallery, where only certain people and only people who have the access to that kind of canonical art lane, which feel comfortable to enter, you know, not to mention having access in other ways. So Elizabeta and Neville came to the studio, and I think you just went like that. And, I did my, spiel, and they're like, what's this, And I said, well, this is something, I'm really excited about, but I don't know, I never thought I could make this work. I haven't done work, site-specific work like that before. So, of course, Elizabeta, just like the title of her first exhibition, kind of hints at, is quite a risk taker. And so she said, let's make that, and it's that moment where she stepped on the edge of the cliff with me. That really pivoted. It really helped me pivot the direction of my practice into being able to produce large-scale public work. And what happens really with that is, so this piece is called One I Call, which is refers to a Rumi poet. And it is produced using a technique called Super Adobe, which was developed by an Iranian architect named Nader Khalili, who's also a Rumi scholar. And these types of works for me, and I'll talk most about this one, and we're only talking about two, so bear with me. But it's quite important because for my process, it's about researching the site. Researching the site doesn't just mean, oh, it's a location in the desert, or oh, it's a beautiful landscape. The researching a site means looking at the archives that are related to Nader Khalili, to study as much as possible without being a specialist, the works of Rumi. Researching the communities and the people that have occupied this space. So often we think of desert landscapes as barren, as empty, as blank, those words are really as inaccurate, I think, as it can be. And for us who have lived and grown up in deserts, we know that that's just simply not true. And whether it's the history of the communities that live there, whether it's the flora and the fauna that exists in that space, these places are rich and they're alive and they have deep-rooted histories. And so for me to approach a project, whether it's the one I'm doing right now or this one, it takes quite a years of research and then developing a work that responds to the site. And we've been talking about a lot this morning, what's the difference between site specificity, site responsiveness, even the conversation around land art. This piece was produced from the earth that was existing, and this is a nature preserve in California and in the Coachella Valley, and it used to be tribal land, and now it is owned by a private conservation foundation. So it has also a very political and conflicted history. So how do we approach sites like that? So I had to start asking myself that question, and one part of it is just really informing myself as much as possible. Part of it is having conversations. I've had so many conversations and walks with the Chuea tribal members, with the rangers that had converted the site into a public space, reading as much as I possibly could cram, and then being able to then decide, okay, Nader Khalili's work makes sense here. Rumi's work makes sense here, and they are kind of the shoulders that I stand on when I make this work, because for me, these types of sculptures are simply a platform, that I come to try to reckon with history that's so often erased, so often marginalized, so often it just goes unreported. So somebody like Nader Khalili, who's an incredible architect, who was so innovative, who had created this whole new way of creating affordable housing and environmentally sustainable buildings. You know, good luck trying to find his mention in any books. So much like Dorian Shafi, so much like a lot of people that come from our part of the world. So I just wanted to create this Burg Hamam with his process, because I love the intersection between this idea of Burg Hamam that houses homing pigeons, that houses our food, our messaging, our communication, that these birds are, you know, communicate our histories over our skies, and also is referring to Dun Shui, where the British armies had come into the village and used the pigeons as target practice, and they were then. When the villagers walked up to them and said, you know, it's not okay, you're shooting our prize pigeons, then the villagers were killed. So, so there's so many layers of narratives that I try to kind of weave together to create a platform where a lot of these marginalized stories can come together and actually reverberate with each other to create empowerment and to create a place of remembrance of our own history, and to empower us at this moment to take those histories. Sometimes they're tragic, sometimes they're joyful, and to empower me, certainly, and invite other people to feel empowered and to bring their narratives to that space. So.
And I think it was also kind of important that for your studio practice at the time and breaking new ground in terms of the scale, which, you know, going back to what is supported when it comes to women artists, you know, this idea that women don't make big work has been persistent for quite some time, and in fact they do. It's just that the male artists generally get more funding, and therefore their stuff's bigger. But women have just as much interest to go large, and they often do. We have an amazing, here sitting in the first row, Lita Albuquerque, a legend of Los Angeles.
Thanks for being here, Lita.
Who actually did, did do a piece at the pyramids. So while Forever is now is the first group exhibition to happen there, it is not the first contemporary project. You should look up Lita's project. What was the year of Lita? 1996. So for the Cairo Biennale, and so, you know, Sherin and I agree on many things, and we kept working together. But as it turned out, when it comes to Desert X, at least, I'm not good at working for people. I'm much better working with them, and so I kind of kept doing my own thing from after doing Desert X 2017, and Sherin went on to do another big piece in Alula, which was controversial in America at the time, but I think I was very supportive of it as somebody who comes from a country that was vilified in the West, and the way that that's usually done sort of collectively, you know, like everybody there is bad, which is obviously, of course, not true. And so I thought it was knowing what art can do and the kind of conversations art can spark. I think it's actually very important that we don't close our minds and our hearts to the possibility that we may actually find people we love in places whose governments we don't agree with. So, so I was very supportive of this project, sort of from the sidelines, but again, Sherin can tell you more about the process.
Yeah, and that again, you know, the fact that Elizabeta was willing to like I said, take that risk alongside me to build this piece. When the New York Times came out the next morning, Desert X, there were quite a few artists in that 2017. And mine was like the little baby in the middle of nowhere. You had to drive like an hour to get to it. On the cover of the art section of New York Times was a picture of what I call. And that validation apparently went a long way. And it really just kind of referring to what Rosa was saying earlier, how do we support our community? How do we support women artists? How do we support artists from our region here, from North Africa, from the Middle East, from Southwest Asia? Like, how do we do that? We have to support each other. And we need, in addition to artists and curators, we need writers, we need critics, we need more people like Rosa, and we need the documentation. And so much of the work is so much of my process and my practice is about calling back that documentation, is not forgetting. The ancient Egyptians believed that a person is not dead until people stopped saying their name. So, we can't stop. We can't forget the people that came before us. So anyways, I guess I got a little bit of hype from being in the New York Times, and when Desert X was going to do this project, they thought, oh, well, we'll just, I'm not going to put words in their mouth, but they invited me to do it. And, at the time, it was a difficult decision, like Elizabeta said, because there was a lot of controversy for Los Angeles artists and American artists in general to go to Saudi Arabia and make work. It was not an easy decision. I had to think about why would I go? It's one thing for me to be in California. It's where I live. I understand it. I'm part of that community. I feel that I have a voice, and I give myself permission to have a voice there. But why would I go to some other country that I don't know much about and make work? So again, going back to this question of site specificity and site responsiveness, what does it mean and how do you give yourself permission, and how do you engage with a site in a place where you're not from that immediate community? So I had to reflect a lot. I spoke to a lot of people in my community who are here and still back in LA, and I decided that I did want to do this work because because I needed to know more. I needed to know more about the women who, in the Bedouin tribes, elders who had built the tents with their hands, weaving the wool to make these tents. I wanted to know more about all these women artists in Saudi Arabia that were in their 20s making work and posting it on Instagram. And I wanted to know more about the Bedouin community that I feel, even though it's outside of me, but I feel like an affinity to, just through kind of our connection of people who live in deserts in the Middle East as fast as it is. And so I decided I'm going to take this as a study, I worked with some women elders from the tribes there, and we did it essentially a collaboration. I made this sculpture, and they made a kind of tracing of it in sado, in wool, and in their own kind of traditional craft. And the piece is essentially an anklet, which is often used traditionally. Everybody here knows cholchet, and is often used sometimes for marriage, sometimes for celebration. So I love the shape, and the shape that is this incomplete circle. And anklet is just magnificent. The site is, oh my God, I can't even tell you, mind-blowing. It just moves your soul. Just the geology of it, and then the traditions and the culture the Alula people, the history of migration through that space. So I felt like there was enough parallels to that experience that I could at least engage with the site, engage with the culture from my perspective, from an outsider perspective, but still not feel like I just flew in for a couple of days and made a piece that just looks like all my other pieces and walked away. I really wanted to make sure that it celebrated and engaged the culture of women in Saudi Arabia. And so I came across this beautiful poem by Alia El Otaibi. I know very little about her because there's not much written about her. It turns out that women from the Bedouin tribes in the peninsula were the poets. And a lot of their poems were recited, so there's not much documentation there. And they're passed down from mother to daughter, from grandmother to daughter, from auntie to niece. And they're recited in private spaces. This notion of this kind of romanticized notion of women's work being small, being domesticated, being hidden, and being private. So I knew immediately that this has to be large. It has to be in context of this geology, and it has to be visible and take up space. I wanted it to take up space. And so the khulkhal is about, maybe 40 feet above your head, and when you first walk, and this is a great photo because when you first walk, you almost don't see anything. It just looks like a black stripe, like a redacted piece of text, right? Like this faraway place that's forbidden. And as if you have the interest and the courage to walk to it, it starts to reveal itself to you. And you can see these sun tunnels that are coated in gold leaf that project the light down onto your head. So it's kind of three positions, from far away, and then from underneath it, and then you look up at the sky through the piece. And then there's this beautiful little boulder just underneath it. So you turn around and sit down because it's a long way. It's a long walk through the sand to this piece. So you sit down and take a breath, and now you're looking out into the valley, and Alia's poem is now legible to you. So it's almost like a prayer or a meditation, a yogic kind of body relationship. Hanya's got it covered because Hanya's got everything in the show covered. So anywho, so that's kind of the story of this piece, and hand in hand with another artist, Manal Douani, that was exhibiting the show. We also organized a series of lectures and talks and engagements with a group of young women artists, and I would say around college-aged women, just to have conversations with them about art and about art practices and about how important it is for us to recall our history, to remember it, to document it, and to take up space in the world with it, especially in public space, especially because, again, I cannot refer to what Rosa was saying. Was saying earlier. These museum spaces are just not accessible to the public as much as we want to think they are.
Collaboration sort of with Sherin as an artist and myself as a writer and a curator, it's about not just plopping art somewhere and decorating something that doesn't really need to be decorated. So in that sense, it has to, I'm just not finally old enough to say no to some things, and the things that I do say no to are those that don't engage with the place that they're at. And so when Sherin came to me with this opportunity for Egypt, first of all, it's my first time in Egypt, so who could say no? But we really spent quite a bit of time talking about the site itself, because it is so famous, it's so well known, it's so ancient, there's so much history there, and so how do you interact with it in a way that's respectful of the land, that's respectful of the community, that gives something back rather than just being another thing that you take a photo of and post on Instagram. So
Can I just say one thing to that, just because that's a really important point, I think, Elizabeta, which is, you know, and again, it goes to how we recall and how we document and archive things. And I love that what you made is not just about the spectacle of the artwork. It's what effect the community had, what effect and what relationship and engagement you had with that community and that conversation that happens, which often never gets recorded. I don't have a picture of the setting because that wasn't the piece, right? It's actually since, I don't know if we even have kept track of where it is because it wasn't treated like an artwork. And so often women's work, that's what happens. And this time it wasn't me, it was the tribal elders from Alula. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize that point.
And it was, you know, I think that in projects like this, because of their scale and the fact that it's often an international, at least with my projects, an international situation. So the amount of problems that we have to troubleshoot is kind of stunning, and we haven't slept in a long time. And so I wanted to show you like just kind of how it starts in the sense that, you know, often these things are done for the glamour of it, and the truth of it is that behind the scenes, it's just really hard work, like all day, all night, without sleep, without never enough funding, never enough. And so what was really heartening about this project and moved me so much, and this photo has all, well, besides Hanya, it has almost everybody else in it, is that how everybody sort of pulled together to help us troubleshoot, because we ran into so many issues, from the calligrapher on the left who just completely stole my heart, to the fabricators, to the artisan, I guess what would he, yeah, it's his team, yeah, he's a preparator. Everybody really came together to help put this up and do it almost as close as Sherin imagined it. We had to change along the way, which is never easy on such a short timeline. And we're still, in fact, waiting for actual, like, super clear photos of the piece, but this is kind of as close as we can get for you today. And I encourage you to come see it in person, because Sherin, you can tell about it, but there are many ways to interact with it, and it's been quite a journey. So,
do you want to go back to the picture of Mr. Harris? So this I think I almost lost it right here when you put this picture up, and then you're putting this up, because and I have to just remind everybody that Hania was literally there, I think, every second of the day with me. You must have just gone to the bathroom for a second, right? Because she's like, any emergency she has to handle. But I wanted to point out that on the left there, Mr. Khamis is a local calligrapher who I worked with at the exhibition that I had here, of Thorns of Love, that was about Doré Shafi's life. And he actually made a mural in one of the adjacent galleries here with Here I Have Returned poem of Doré Shafi. And so, because we had some technical difficulties with engraving, I called him and he came, I think, what time was it? Like 8 at night in his t-shirt. And was like, okay, let's do this. I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna put the calligraphy on the piece. And it was freezing cold. and severe wind as you'll probably see tomorrow. And he was just ready to sit there and go for it and write the calligraphy right on the work. And we had to convince him to go home and come back the next day. And everybody here, Mido and Ika, the team from Mobilishat was just on site every day, helping support this work. And we often think of work as this, artistic practices, these solitary practices. I'm off in a cave, getting inspiration from I don't know where, making pieces. But with this kind of work, it's all about that collaboration. And I really, it was very important to me that this work was produced here in Egypt by craftsmen and women that work in traditional practices here. And so when the people from Mobilia said that they were willing to do it, I was just so thrilled. And I worked with some weavers, and I worked with a lot of, and Mr. Khamis and other people who were also helped support create this piece. And so for me, it's a really important consideration, not just where the site is, but who are the people that you collaborate with to make the work. So real quick, because I know we're way over, but so real quick, the piece is based on an ancient musical instrument, the sistrum. And the sistrum was used by the priestesses of Hathor in worship. And it was the only instrument that was allowed in the inner sanctum of the temples. And if you notice a lot, I don't have to tell the people in this room, but in representation of the goddess Isis, she usually has one in her hand. And it is a ceremonial instrument that is used in processions that have to do with wellness, that have to do with passing into the afterlife, that have to do with healing and with renewal. And so for this piece, I've been away from Egypt for a long time. I come and go, but it's always thrilling and challenging to come back. There's always a little part of you that feels, where is home? Where do you belong? So this work, so it's an honor to get to do this work. And to stand at the foot of the pyramids and to look at my ancestors' burial places in this sacred place. And to look at the Queen's Pyramid. So if you see the correct position, when you get some good pictures, the correct position of the circle, it actually holds a frame around the three Queen's Pyramids that you see here. And so every element in the work is really thought through as a way to engage with the site. You can't quite see it right here, but these kind of curved stripes are indigo fabric wool that is soaked in jasmine oil. And at the end of each of them is def, which is kind of like a symbol that they use in these particular ones, funny enough, are Coptic symbols that the deacons and the priests used to worship in the Coptic communities here in Egypt, which I grew up in the Coptic community here. And there's some of them just laying on the ground underneath, and so when this magnificent wind blows, the piece sings again. For me, again, it's a call and response kind of process between me being present in this day and then recalling all these histories of all these women who have been working and who have been supporting and healing for for thousands of years in Egypt. Whether it's the goddesses were, the priestesses worshiping Hathor, or whether it's Durrey Shafi, whose poem is painted on the inside of the circle, or whether it's the women who wake up in the middle of the night in the dark to harvest the jasmine flowers that are the flowers that are used to create the healing oils that are used in a lot of these ceremonies. And I was lucky enough to convince a dear friend of mine, because I'm not a performance artist, and she used to walk with me and just gently apply the oil to the sculpture. And so we walked up to the piece and we anointed really the fabric with the jasmine oil. And so when you walk up to the piece, it's using all of your senses, you know, and in particular the senses that target memory, sounds, rhythms, smells. And the sistrum is on its side because it's rising up from the ground, and it then becomes like a shelter. You know, we walk up to it and it protects you, it holds you, and then it holds this beautiful history behind it. And it's just, again, as usual, it's not so much the beauty shot in the end, but it's everything that leads up to it. Every minute, every person, every decision, that the ones that I intended to make, and the things that didn't happen, that actually resulted in maybe new parts of the sculpture that are even more meaningful, I think, because they are like immediately responsive to what needed to happen. So I don't know, I'm like gone into the field now. Help me.
No, I mean, it's been a great honor to get to do this work. I think Sherin is right. It says that it's always about the process and not so much about the finished work. And you can't, the funny thing about process is that you can't really plan it out. Like, there's no way to know this is exactly what will happen. And that's the greatest thing about art, but it's also, you know, from the kind of curatorial producing perspective, it's the hardest thing about it, because that's where the risk-taking comes in, and having to convince people to support that kind of effort, because I think it's important for our growth, not just on a personal level, but on a collective one as well. And when we do that in an international, collaborative kind of way, everybody, I think, comes out of it a little better person than they were when they walked in, which for me, that's where that's why we stayed up until 2 a.m. and we're at the site in such crazy conditions that I got a cold in time of COVID. So
I think maybe it's in the failures. It's in the failures and the mix-ups and the challenges that the piece really became, for me at least, became important. Because it was doing, the pieces of the conditions actually forced us to do what I was kind of trying to conceptualize, and I hope that I did, like when I called, that I did in Desert X, and like Khulkhat Aliyeh, that you all, when you go see it, find it to be a platform that, and a space that allows you to bring your narrative in there. So these are, 3 elements of narratives that were erased in the case of Durrey Shafi, that were forgotten, maybe in the case of the priestesses of Hathor, and invisible in the case of the women farmers who harvest the jasmine. So really, I guess in the end, my practice, my goal is to make the invisible work of women visible, because that's what I need right now, and that's what I think we need right now. We need to continue to insist, to step into the space, to take up space and to speak out, to be loud, right? And to take risks together and to support each other.
Yeah, I think that kind of wraps it up. If there are any questions, we're happy to answer, but we've gone way over time.
Really, thank you for persevering for 5 hours of talks. I really appreciate that you hung out with me and Elizabeta. Thanks, and we'll be around too if you want to come to the next sessions. Thank you. Sorry, Lita.
Well, it's actually not a question. It's a bravo, and I'm very moved with everything you just said. And what I find really spectacular is that you've taken, I'm going to start crying, that you've taken a woman's, in both pieces, you know, you've taken a rather small object, an anklet, a musical instrument that's intimate, and you've blown it into this incredible macho success, you know, piece. And yet it still has the incredible sensitivity. I had the privilege of being out on the site during the night with our team here. And the magic was also the moving parts, how you've done the jasmine, also hearing about the piece for so long, about the women and the amount of work that they've done to make jasmine oil and how you wanted to celebrate that and how you've done that on this wool that you've imbued it, and then the music that comes from that. And the sound of this piece is just spectacular. But what I love more than anything is there is such both pieces are so there and not there, so there and so not there, and so here we are, you know, it's who we are. So thank you.
I mean, it kind of pays to have your heroes in the room. Yeah. Any other questions? Go home and sleep.
Well,
Or maybe we go party.
yeah.
Let's party.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks so much.